right. Good to go. Hello, everyone. I'm going to interrupt everyone's conversation again. I do apologise. So we're about to kick off today, but firstly, I would like to welcome those who are joining us via live stream. So for the benefit of those in the room, this is being streamed online, and we do have an audience as well. So for the benefit of those who are joining us online, you can follow the conversation on Twitter using the @CEDA_news with the hashtag #StateOfTas. Again, you can join the conversation through Pigeonhole, so that is ceda.pigeonhole.at. And the password, I do apologise, there's been a slight change, so the password is actually Tasmania, not State of Tas. And that goes for everyone in the room as well. Next, I would like to welcome Jason Kemposki, the Global Head of Public Sector for Westpac, who is going to have some opening remarks. Jason will be joining us via live stream, so he should be appearing up on the screen, and he'll be introducing our speaker today. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of myself and the Westpac Group, I really would like to extend a very warm welcome to you all to the CEDA Tasmania State of the State luncheon. I hope you all had a very enjoyable lunch. Noting Adam's previous acknowledgement of country, I'd also like to pay my respects to Australia's First Nations peoples on whose land we gather today. For me here, I'm physically based in Geelong at the moment. That's the Wadawurrung people. Can I extend my respects also to any other First Nations peoples who may be attending today's event, either in person or indeed online across Australia. The Honourable Peter Gutwein, MP Premier of Tasmania, fellow CEDA trustees, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honour to be providing this introduction to today's event. In fact, it's the 11th time that I have been involved in a Tasmanian CEDA State of the State event. And I think, as may have been previously mentioned, this is the 8th year in a row that Westpac has partnered with CEDA to support this fantastic event. Unfortunately, due to the challenges of COVID-19 and what that's delivered to us over the last 18 months, I cannot be in person in Hobart today. But with the help of technology that we've all become so familiar with of recent times, I can at least be part of today's proceedings in a virtual sense. However, I do assure you, Premier, that as soon as I can get on a flight down to Hobart, I will be there to visit in person, and no doubt staying the weekend with my partner and spending lots of money to help push the Tasmanian economy along. Can I take this opportunity also to acknowledge my colleagues from the Westpac Institutional Bank Tasmanian Public Sector team, in particular Darren Backhouse. I can assure you Darren is in the room, unlike myself, so feel free to go and have a chat to him at the Westpac table if you have an opportunity. Now, today presents a great opportunity for us all to hear directly from the Premier, not only about the current situation in Tasmania, but more importantly about the state as it heads into the future. Now, no matter what state you've been living in over the recent time throughout this global pandemic, we've all suffered at some point. And I think, without playing any favourites here, I think it's true to say that Tasmania has done exceptionally well and better than most at avoiding a lot of the health and economic disruptions that we've seen across the country. We've seen the Tasmanian economy outperform over the last 18 months of the COVID pandemic, benefiting from the Tasmanian government's signature $420 million COVID stimulus package, along with other state-initiated programs and federal government support. State final demand has surged 13% over the current year to this June quarter, and this is on top of an already strong result that was up 5% at the end of 2019, before the pandemic had started. In terms of the housing sector, we've seen very strong gains, with new home building up almost 25% above the level seen at the end of 2019, again before the pandemic, the strongest performance by a long way of any state in the nation. I'm sure many of you that are in Hobart have noticed the extraordinary almost 27% increase in house prices over the current year to September. In fact, since 2015, there's been a stellar growth in Hobart housing prices as buyers have flocked to Hobart, but not only Hobart, the whole of Tasmania more broadly. I think it's fair to say that the secret is out now, well and truly, that Tasmania is a wonderful place to live. Whilst the Westpac card tracker, which is based on millions of credit and debit card transactions processed by the bank, suggests that consumer spending has started to flatten out a little bit in the September quarter, we see a very different story as it relates to employment. Tasmania's labour market continues its strong momentum, with unemployment rate dropping to 4.8% in September. Crucially, the underemployment rate has fallen to 8.5%, which is well below the average across the country, which is sitting at around 9.2%. This is clearly welcome news for a state that has traditionally struggled with persistent high unemployment. These numbers tell the story of a strong and well-rounded economy, which is backed by an infrastructure pipeline and focused investment, a position that any business would want to be part of. With over 90% of the state's electricity generation coming from renewables, Tasmania has proven that economic growth and emissions reduction are complementary. Far from being just the Apple Isle, as we used to refer to Tasmania, it has a diversified modern economy that's the envy of other states. Setting the example on all things tourism, food, wine, whisky, arts and renewable energy, the state of Tasmania has a lot to be proud of. Often the envy of their mainland peers, these industries continue to deliver consumer spending and employment opportunities for thousands of Tasmanians. At the Westpac Group, we're really proud to build on our long-term engagement across Tasmania, which started almost 170 years ago, I think 168 years ago. In Tasmania, Westpac is widely represented across the state, offering retail financial services, consumer and wholesale banking, supporting our customers across a range of industries such as agribusiness, infrastructure, retail, tourism and the public sector, to name a few. And it's a privilege also to be the banker to the Government of Tasmania since 1998 and a partner in the state's success. And we really look forward to continuing our engagement in the years ahead. We see our central role in supporting the government in helping integrate new digital technologies in faster, better and more innovative ways of working. And we're doing this through data-driven technologies that unify the needs of agencies in optimising balance sheets and streamlining services. So in summary, the Tasmanian economy remains upbeat and leading the country on a number of fronts. And I congratulate Premier Gutwein and his government for delivering that. To hear more about these achievements, I'm sure, it is really my pleasure now to introduce you to our keynote speaker today, the Tasmanian Premier. The Premier was first elected to the Tasmanian Parliament for the seat of Bass back in 2002, and in January 2020, he was elected leader of the Tasmanian Liberal Party and consequently Premier of Tasmania. He also has responsibility as Treasurer. In his spare time, I understand he enjoys reading, movies and spending time with the family, and he also keeps fit by regularly training. I understand he's both a qualified black belt instructor in Taekwondo and a marathon runner, which I'm sure makes him more than capable of holding his own at a national cabinet meeting, although he might want to share a few comments on that as part of his presentation or the question session afterwards. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, with that, let me please welcome the Premier of Tasmania, the Honourable Peter Gutwein, to the lectern. Thank you.
Well, Jason, thank you very much for that kind introduction. The check's in the mail. That was very good, thank you. Look, could I begin first of all by paying my respects to the Tasmanian Aboriginal people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And Adam, note the very good work that's gone on in Western Australia in terms of one of the first treaties that has been signed, as I understand it. And I think most in the room would understand that we currently have a body of work underway at the moment with Professors Warner and McCormick that are working across the state and will bring a report to government very shortly in terms of what the next steps are for Tasmania in terms of reconciliation, but importantly to hear from Tasmanian Aboriginals themselves what their views are on what the pathway to treaty might look like, and importantly what's important from their perspectives. And as I've indicated, we'll have that very soon. Look, I do want to, before I move to discuss matters relating to the state, just touch on one very important matter first and foremost, and that is in terms of COVID, and I'll say more as we move forward, but I do want to make these points, and I'm saying this to every group that I speak to now. Yeah, we have done very well in terms of our response to COVID, and life generally here in Tasmania has been pretty much almost normal. But we've set a date now in terms of the 15th of December to reopen, and in doing that, we know that at some stage COVID will come to Tasmania. And if you look across the country, more than 165,000 cases of COVID, 1,600 plus deaths. Now, whilst we've unfortunately had 13 deaths here in Tasmania at the beginning of the pandemic, we have largely been untouched. It will be important as we move forward, that we move forward as a community, but importantly that we ready ourselves for when COVID arrives. And in setting that date of the 15th of December, I know full well, as I'm sure many in the room do, that COVID will arrive here and we will need to deal with that. And so every group that I speak to, I'm speaking in similar terms because we need to ready ourselves for that. Importantly today, I want to touch on a number of things. Firstly, Tasmania's current economic position. In fact, I might say, Jason, very ably explained by yourself. It's going beautifully, and I'll touch on some of those matters in a moment. Our plan to reconnect Tasmania with the rest of the country and, importantly, to the world as well. Some of the key strategies that we're working on for growth, and then obviously we'll take some questions at the close. Where I want to start is just in terms of some of the outcomes that we have seen, and in terms of state final demand, as Jason mentioned a moment ago, it has been outstanding. And when you look at the graph, in terms of where the country and all of the states and territories ended up in at the end of the 2019-20 financial year, the bounce has been extraordinary. And I don't mind saying that during the course of the last 18 months, and especially over the course of last year, there were many economists that had many views about what might occur. And I do recall Federal Treasury at the time and our State Treasury making the point that they could foresee ongoing recession and unemployment at above 12.5% by the end of the last calendar year. Now, importantly, that hasn't happened, and our economy bounced back extraordinarily well, as it did across the country. And I expect that we're going to see another bump, another increase as we see the loosening of restrictions in New South Wales and Victoria, especially in coming months. In terms of goods exports, we hit a record of over $4 billion, which was an extraordinary outcome. The world had a great appetite for our metals and manufacturing products towards the end of last year, and we can't see that abating at the moment. And importantly, our service exports, we will see an increase again over the coming 12 months as we reopen to international students moving forward. In terms of dwelling approvals, the circumstance in Tasmania has been extraordinary in a Tasmanian context, similar to what has occurred across the rest of the country in terms of the stimulus that was brought to bear by the federal government and matched by this state government and other state governments around the country. We've seen a rapid growth in the number of dwellings being built, and in fact, if you can get a plumber or an electrician or a builder at the moment, you're one of the fortunate few because they are flat out. But importantly, what we're seeing has been a significant increase in our dwelling approvals. Normally, in a normal year, around 2,500 to 2,600 dwelling approvals would go across the desks of councils. Over the last 12 months, over 4,200 dwelling approvals, and that appetite isn't abating at the moment. The weekend I had the pleasure of being back in Launceston, which is unusual, and with my wife we went and had a drive around the suburbs of Launceston, and I was staggered by the amount of building that is going on and the development that's occurring. And importantly, it's a phenomenon that we see continuing to occur. Importantly as well, as the borders reopen, one of the things that hasn't driven the demand for housing has been an absence of population growth. And as we open up, they're knocking on the door now, and they've been knocking loudly. We're going to see population growth, I think, well above the Treasury forecasts that are in the budget at the moment. In terms of retail trade, slides up there, retail trade, in my view, has always been the best litmus test for the strength of your economy. Now, if people have the confidence to spend, then that indicates an underlying strength broadly across your whole economy, and what we've seen is record numbers in terms of our retail spend. And when I look back to the plan that we laid out last year, one of the key things that we knew that we had to do in terms of, one, keeping people safe, but secondly was to ensure that people had confidence. And confidence levels in the state have been at record levels. In fact, the most recent NAB survey indicated that not only were we the most confident jurisdiction in the country, people viewed our business conditions as the best as well. And consistently, confidence has remained high. And for a small jurisdiction, it's something that as a government, as a Premier and as a Treasurer, we will work hard to hang on to, because confidence is fragile, but when you've got it, it will drive your economy, and we're seeing that in our underlying numbers. Employment, we're at a record level of employment, some 263,000 people employed in Tasmania at the moment. Just come back to those comments I made a moment ago about the federal and state Treasury forecasts last year. Ongoing recession and 12.5% unemployment was forecast, excuse me, by the end of the last calendar year. What we've seen is our unemployment rate dropped to 4.8%, one of the lowest numbers that we've seen in this state in a long period of time, with record employment. Our biggest challenge, and one I'll touch on as we move through the presentation, is that we've got more jobs than we have people to fill them. And that is both a challenge but also a fantastic opportunity for this state as we move forward. Job vacancies are at record levels, 6,500. In fact, the growth in job vacancies has led the country in terms of growth terms. So there are jobs available in Tasmania at the moment, and in fact the few people that I've spoken to today in the lead up to sitting down for lunch indicated to me that the biggest challenge that they have, they're busy but they need skilled people, and that's certainly something that I think that not just this jurisdiction but other jurisdictions are going to find a challenge, but also an opportunity as we move forward. If we look at the overall state of the economy, importantly, our economy last year, for the period to the end of June 30, and I say last year when we were expected to be in recession, ourselves and WA were the only two states or jurisdictions in the country that actually had growth over that period. Now, it was below what we'd forecast, 0.3% was our growth rate, but it never dipped into negative territory, and likewise WA had a strong outcome as well, which is quite extraordinary when you think back to where we were during the March quarter of last year. And for those of you that were in private business, those of you that are working in corporations, most of you would have been at home because we had stay-at-home orders on, and we closed the vast majority of businesses that were operating in the state for a period as we worked our way through that, and therefore took a significant economic hit. But we've bounced back, and bounced back very strongly, and Treasury at the moment are forecasting 4% growth this current year and employment growth of a further 2% as well. Now, I want to just chat about our Reconnecting Tasmania plan. At the moment, as it stands today, we've got more than 89.3% of Tasmanians fully vaccinated. We will hit that in this coming week. We've always said our target was Melbourne Cup Day, and then became apparent in terms of the timing of the second doses that we would hit the 80% target in the Melbourne Cup week. And as the second doses are now provided over coming days, we will hit that target and be in a very strong position moving forward. But we've taken our own path in terms of the reopening and our Reconnecting Tasmania plan. From day one, it was it was concerning that we as a jurisdiction had an older and more challenged jurisdiction in terms of health outcomes and underlying health conditions. And therefore, we walked a different path to other states and territories. Tasmania was the first state to ban cruise ships. We were the first state, and ridiculed for a period, for closing our borders. The bloke in WA seems to have doubled down on that in recent times. He made an art form of it. But we were obviously cognisant that we needed to do everything that we could to protect our older and more vulnerable population. And in terms of the national plan, that national plan had an ambition to be open by Christmas after going through certain gates, 70% and 80%. We added our own gate at 90%. which we expect that we will achieve by early December. In fact, we should hit 90% of over 16-year-olds, the eligible cohort, by the last week of November, and the 12 to 15-year-old cohort in the first week of December, being 90% vaccinated. Now, the other test, or the other key matter that I needed to be comfortable with, and the government needed to be comfortable with, was that 100% of those eligible had had the opportunity to be vaccinated. When we open our borders, COVID will come. And when COVID comes, we know that some people will get sick. We know even if you're vaccinated, you could get very sick, and unfortunately, those that aren't vaccinated, some of them might die. And so we need to be very comfortable that in taking that decision to reopen on the 15th of December, that every Tasmanian had had the opportunity to be vaccinated. And I'm very comfortable as we work our way forward in terms of the mobile buses that we've got, in terms of the outreach that we provided, in terms of the state clinics, the GPs, the pharmacies that are on board, that Tasmanians have that opportunity to get vaccinated. And if there's anybody in this room that isn't, I would encourage you to get vaccinated, because on the 15th of December, we will open our borders, and with it, COVID will come. Now, just want to make this point as well in terms of how we're going to manage that moving through, because we will again be slightly different to the other states. If you want to come to Tasmania, and Jason, I can't wait till you and your partner come down and start spending money. I know it always provides a blip on the economy, a bit of an uplift, but you will need to be tested, and you'll need to provide a negative COVID test within 72 hours of travel, and you'll need to be double vaccinated to enter the state. If you don't meet that criteria, then there'll be quarantine arrangements in place, and we will run that for the first 4 weeks. The reason that I want to do that is that we have not had the experience with COVID that other states have had, but we know that once this thing arrives here, if we don't manage it carefully, it will get away from us, and we need to ensure that both our health system but also our community, many Tasmanians are anxious about the reopening, that we manage it carefully. And so for that first month at least, those rules will be in place, and then we will review it and we'll see where we move to from then. In terms of our health preparedness, in terms of our public health preparedness, I'm very comfortable that we have the systems in place and the surge capacity available. But the most important thing that we can all do as individuals, and I think it's telling when you look at the numbers out of Victoria today for the first time, as their vaccination rates have increased, their case load is now below 1,000. They're still seeing hospitalisations, they're still seeing people in ICUs, and they're still seeing deaths, unfortunately, but the caseload's coming down. Likewise, we haven't seen the surge that was expected in New South Wales. And again, all that's changed in those two jurisdictions has been the level of vaccination. And so I cannot stress strongly enough the need to vaccinate and to ensure that we protect both ourselves and our community. Now, last year, our plan was based around, if we kept people safe, if we kept confidence high, if we supported our economy where we needed to, that we would see strong economic growth, that we would see our jobs maintained or increase, and importantly, that we would see a way of life continue. As we move forward from here, that same strategy is going to be important. We want to ensure that we keep people safe, and we've taken the steps that we can, and we think that our plan for reopening will provide us with that opportunity. But it's the other opportunities as we move forward that will provide real opportunities for growth as we take these steps. And I want to touch on in a moment our infrastructure investment. I know that there's been a bit written by some in the room in recent days about infrastructure, and it's interesting. I'll talk about our plan in that regard and what our thinking was last year when we rolled out record levels. I want to talk about skills and education and workforce growth, renewables, climate and future industries Tasmania. I know with Bess here and her very strong interest in Marinus and that work that's been undertaken by Tas Networks over time. That is a fantastic project and something that I think will provide great opportunities not just for this state but for the country. I want to talk about growing our export markets, also taking our place on the national stage. And I've been a strong advocate for our own AFL team, for our own NBL team, I see great opportunities for Tasmania in that space, and for the life of me, I cannot understand why, as a state of this federation, when they call something a national game, that one of the states of that federation doesn't have its own team in it, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then also welcoming back visitors. Now, we have a $5.7 billion infrastructure program over 4 years. It's a significant program. Last year, when framing the budget, and bearing in mind it was a late budget, in November, December for the 1920 financial year. One of the challenges that we faced, or for the 2021 financial year, one of the challenges that we faced was, based on the advice that we had in terms of where the country could be, where our economy could be, and where the broader Australian economy could be, there was a view that during 2020 that the private sector would withdraw from the market, that banks may not have been as supportive as what they could have been, and that there may have been a collapse in terms of construction. So as a government, like other governments around the country, we stepped up and we provided the largest infrastructure program that we could. And importantly, what occurred was that confidence remained high. And importantly, what occurred was that the private sector remained in its place, and we saw continued investment and growth in private sector developments as well. And so what we have now is, I think, a wealth of opportunities. We have a government that has a supercharged infrastructure program that sits there being rolled out, but at the same time, we have significant interest and activity in the private sector market as well. And that provides us with, as I've said, I think a wealth of opportunities. A challenge on one front, that we don't have enough people to do the work, but an opportunity on the other to ensure that we can provide those Tasmanians that want the skills and that want to grasp that opportunity with the option to do so. Now, if we look at the broader growth in infrastructure, when I first became Treasurer back in 2014-15, which seems a long time ago, our infrastructure program was about $1.4 billion over 4 years. The infrastructure program that was included in the 21-22 budget, which we've recently just brought down, was $5.7 billion. That included around $1 billion worth of new investments in ports and hydro generation, as well as further equity investments in the government businesses and a $3.8 billion general government sector spend. So we have a significant program moving forward which will underpin, I think, the civil, the residential and the commercial construction sectors moving forward, because not only are we building houses, we're building schools, we're building hospitals, we're building roads, we're building bridges right across the sector, and importantly, as the private sector remains strong, and there will be some competition that we'll need to manage our way through with this, it provides great opportunity for Tasmanians moving forward. In terms of skills, training and workforce growth, $8 billion worth of investment across the 4 years into education, skills and training. Largest investment ever by a government, but we need to make it. Importantly, I know the TAFE are in the room. We want to see TAFE pivot, remain in government hands, but importantly become more like the businesses that it's there to serve, in terms of being nimble, in terms of being able to make decisions quickly, in terms of being able to look at a skills challenge and deal with it effectively and efficiently and quickly. And importantly, we've also partnered in this space with the MBA, the HIA and the civil contractors, and provided significant investment to work with them to ensure that we can grow the base of those people that are working in those industry sectors, that we can have greater reach out into the regions, greater reach in terms of our young people, greater reach in terms of those that may be thinking of leaving the industry or maybe looking at reskilling, and provide them with an opportunity to take part in what will be one of the most aggressively growing sectors, not just in Tasmania, but in the country in terms of our infrastructure. In terms of renewables, climate and future industries, in the budget we took the view that we needed to put in place a new structure that brought together from across government all of those parts of government that were working on renewable energy or climate, to provide them with the opportunity to have a focused strategic approach. I believe right now that we have a moment We have a moment that's been built on 100 years of investment into hydroelectricity by successive governments over time and communities. We have a moment because we have one of the best emissions profiles, not just in this country, but in the world. Now, we're 6 out of 7 years we've been able to achieve net zero emissions, which is something that other states and territories can only dream about. In fact, many countries can only dream about it. So, on one hand, we have the renewable energy base. We also have the emissions profile, which others are so envious of. It's why recently we've set and put out for public consultation a net zero target of 2030. The reason being that we've achieved it already. Importantly, we can work with our industry sectors to ensure across the board that we improve our outcomes and we become even more emissions negative, if I can call it that, in terms of our standing. And what's happened as a result of the position that we have is that the eyes of the world are on us. Right now, if we were a country, we'd be in the top 5 countries in terms of renewable energy generation. If we were a country, we'd be in the top 5 in terms of our emission profile. And so for Tasmania, a small jurisdiction, the bottom of Australia, dislocated from markets, we have an opportunity and the world is looking at us, and I think that capital and smart people will flow here as a result of that. Importantly, Project Marinus, in front of us, and as I've said, Tas Networks are working on that. That provides this small state with the opportunity to assist the rest of the country as it transitions to more renewable energy options. You know, it's bold, it's brave, but importantly, you know, we can play a real key part in the architecture of the country moving forward. At the moment, in terms of hydrogen, you know, the eyes of the world are on us. We have a range of proponents, some louder than others, looking at the opportunity here. But we've never been in this position before where, on one hand, we have proponents for projects and proponents looking to build new energy together at the table, and as a government what we've got to do is to find the right architecture, the right pathway so that Tasmanians can see real benefits and that the state's best interests are taken care of. You know, it is a fantastic position. We are in rude good health in that regard, and it's something as a government we're working very hard on. And Anton Voss, without mentioning you, you've got a big job in front of you. In terms of growing export markets, you know, we had a fantastic outcome in terms of our exports over the previous year. In fact, better than what we had expected. The appetite of the world remained strong, which we had not expected that it would, but it did. Importantly, we're looking at how we can diversify. You know, we're putting people on the ground into Japan, into Singapore, into the States. Obviously, with free trade agreements being struck with the UK, there are opportunities that will come. And again, you know, the world wants what we make, what we produce, and in terms of our service exports, the world wants to be educated here as well. You know, we have a fantastic opportunity in front of us. Talk briefly about the national stage. I better just check because I can go on with the national stage for about an hour. Just in terms of the fundamental proposition in terms of Tasmania being on the national stage is this. We are a state in a federation. There is a national game that is being played and we don't get to play our part in that. Yet what we have done for decades, since the inception of the game, is we have provided some of the best players that have ever graced a field to play for other clubs and other states and other jurisdictions. Importantly, you know, I think our time is right now, and I've never been more confident that we are in a position where we can achieve our own AFL team. And in doing so, what that will do is act as a magnet. It will draw more people to the game. It will improve our health outcomes because we'll have more people playing sport, and it can underpin our game of football here in Tasmania, which for many decades, in fact the last 2 decades, has been dislocated. And I see it as a fantastic opportunity both for a men's team and also for a women's team. And again, these things are not driven by the revenues that you generate at the gate. They are driven by outbound marketing. And when you've got the fantastic ovals that we have in Tasmania and the opportunity for national sponsors to advertise, we have an opportunity and a right, I believe, to be on that national stage. We've done it with basketball. We've got negotiations underway with the A-League. And I must say my conversations with Gil McLachlan in recent months, at times have been challenging. He's had a pandemic to deal with, and I'd give this nod to the AFL. They have done an unbelievable job of ensuring that there was some normality in a sporting sense in this country as we managed through the pandemic, and they got players on the ground, albeit many of them out of COVID bubbles, but they kept the game going. And again, I'll give a nod to WA. Who would have thought that they could have held the grand final as good as what they did? But they managed it, and it was, I think, a good outcome for the country because it demonstrated that even when the hallowed ground of the MCG couldn't be trodden on grand final day, this country found a way to put the biggest show on earth on, and we did it. And I think that should provide everybody with great heart. Importantly, we'll continue to pursue those options. I think that every young Tasmanian that has an aspiration should have the same opportunities as other people that live in this country. And I'll make this final point on this. Football clubs have aspirations. They have aspirations to win games. They have aspirations to win flags. But importantly, football clubs, like every sporting club, has a broader aspiration than that, and that is to ensure that young people become better people as a result of the time that they have spent in that club or that organisation. And as I've said to Gil McLachlan, our aspiration is that we simply want that same opportunity for young Tasmanian men and women to have the opportunity to become better young men and women, to live better and more fulfilled lives by having a similar pathway to those in other states and territories. Now, welcoming back visitors, I've touched on it, and we're going to do it cautiously as we move our way through our plan. And I'm sure that there will be some criticism as we do so. The tourism sector will obviously want visitors to flood in as quickly as they can. There will be issues and bottlenecks that will be created as we manage our borders over that first month because the demand for Tasmania is very strong. But the most important thing, and the thing that has driven me for the last 18 to 20 months, has been that we need first and foremost to be able to keep people safe. And we will step back into this cautiously. The demand is there. We will manage that as best we possibly can and ensure that as we do so, and the virus is introduced to Tasmania, that we do it in a way that we can manage and importantly keep people safe. As for our operators, we've already provided significant support and will continue to do so. The aim of this is to ensure that we keep our borders open, we allow people in, we keep their businesses open as we manage our way through this. And importantly, I think that we can have a win-win as a result. So in closing, I make the point that COVID-19 will continue to challenge us as we move forward. But if we continue to work together as we have done, and over the course of this last 18 months, and I'd remind everyone of this, when we were at our worst last year, when we were closing down hospitals, when we had challenges and 5,000, 6,000 people that we had sequestered in their homes and we had stay-at orders in place, the thing that filled me with great heart was that Tasmanians, regardless of race, religion, circumstance or background, held out their hands to each other in what was, I thought at the time, was the most extraordinary example of a common humanity that I've ever seen. And as we move forward through this, there will be twists and turns, and we will need to do that again. And so I would encourage us all to simply just be Tasmanians as we work our way through this, because we will get through it, and importantly, life will return to a level of normal sooner than what people think. Importantly, get vaccinated. Our businesses are strong, our economy remains strong, the opportunity remains very strong. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Premier. That was quite an insightful presentation. Just a reminder to everyone to log on to Pigeonhole. So this is a brief Q&A. If you have a question, you can do that through the app. So that's ceda.pigeonhole.at. You can also vote up comments. So if someone's already asked a question, you can vote that up. That's also for our live stream audience as well. If you would like to ask a question in the room, please raise your hand. Jim does have a mic. He'll walk around. And just introduce yourself and where you're from. But I might kick things off. Premier, you presented a pretty strong economic outlook for the state. How much of it is underpinned by state and federal stimulus versus sort of the underlying strength of the economy?
Well, most of the federal stimulus is timed out. In fact, we haven't been a beneficiary of the supports at a federal level that we've seen flow into Victoria and New South Wales over the last 6 months because we just simply haven't been in a position where we've been locked down. We obviously had 3 short days recently as a result of one particular person coming in with COVID. But outside of that, federal stimulus has not really factored into our thinking moving forward. Importantly, the key stimulus that we still have in the budget is a very strong infrastructure program moving forward. We've got some supports that are being provided at the moment for tourism businesses and targeted to tourism businesses on the basis that the border closures of New South Wales and Victoria have obviously affected our inbound tourism. But outside of that, there is little stimulus that we're currently receiving, and importantly, we're not factoring that in as something that underpins our future growth.
It's good to know. I mean, on your comment with infrastructure, there is quite a number of projects happening around the country, as well as here in Tasmania, as an ambitious infrastructure program. With the skill shortage issue, how and the rising cost of materials, as well as sort of the supply chain fragility, how will you work to deliver these ambitious projects on time? And how do you man these projects?
Well, in terms of the state projects, and I'll make this point again and make it very clearly, when we brought down the budget last year, one of our key thinkings in it was that we would see the private sector leave the market. At that time, there was obviously great uncertainty for private sector investment, concern about whether or not they'd be able to get finance. And so from a state point of view, we brought forward significant infrastructure spending. Now, what we're finding though, and I think this is a real positive, and I wish that some people would write about this, is that what we've seen is the private sector continue to grow and invest, which ultimately is a key aim of government. Now, in terms of our key projects, there are a range of key projects that we need to continue advancing, and we will do that. The remainder of the infrastructure program, we will work to deliver those projects in full, but we'll manage the timing of it to ensure that we've got sufficient capacity.
Yeah, and I think skill migration will probably play a role in that, would you say?
Well, one thing that holds me in great stead, and I take great confidence from, is that last year at the peak of the pandemic, when we had just under 1,000 people that were quarantined in hotels travelling in from interstate, around 50%, in fact more than 50% on average of those people were paying for the privilege to be in that hotel because they wanted to move here or they were bringing skills here. And so the appetite for Tasmania is very strong. And so I do expect that we will see a migration of some labour, but importantly, we want to have a very strong approach here in Tasmania, which is why we're working with TasTAFE at the moment. We believe there is an opportunity to grow our own skills base and, importantly, to have a greater reach than what we've had in the past. Right now in Tasmania, if you are looking for a job, if you are looking for an opportunity, it is there. What we've got to do is ensure that we can provide the skills and training that you need to be able to grasp it.
So we might head to a pigeonhole question now. So what programs can be put in place to mitigate the affordable housing crisis and homelessness that's currently taking place?
Well, the way to get yourself out of a housing challenge is to build more houses. And as I said in my presentation, in a normal year, we would see around 25 to 2,600 dwelling approvals go across the desks of councils. In the last 12 months, it's been around 4,200. And so approvals are at record highs. Importantly, what we're seeing is construction being at a record high as well. And so we're building houses as quickly as we possibly can. And in fact, we have the largest social and affordable housing program that any government of any colour in Tasmania has ever rolled out in terms of building that social and affordable stock. But it's challenging. Tasmania, by virtue of its success, one, in keeping people safe, two, in the fact that confidence has remained high, three, as a result of having jobs, is acting as a magnet to the rest of the country. And we will see population growth, I think, above the forecasts the Treasury have provided in the budget.
With the borders opening both domestically and internationally, what role how much pressure do you think international students and workers will put on housing here in Tasmania?
Well, in terms of international students, the university already has significant housing available for their international students, but for obvious reasons, that's not being used for international students at the moment because they haven't been able to come in. So I think the key challenge with international students will be ensuring that they can enter the state, and as I've said, the current rules will be that you need a test within 72 hours, it needs to be negative, and you need to be double vaxxed. And so for either international visitors or students entering the state, that'll be the rules that will apply for that first month that we're opened, and then we'll review that and move forward. So I don't see any major inhibitors in terms of international students coming back. That will be a matter for the Prime Minister in terms of whether he still applies any caps, noting that we've got 45,000, I think at last count, Australians overseas that are on the list to come back. And so how he manages that, that's a matter for the federal government. But here in Tasmania, I think working with the university, we can quite sensibly and responsibly find the right pathway for international students next year.
Just on the topic of international students, do you think there will be an issue in attracting international students to Tasmania in particular, given the strong border controls that we've had both nationally and domestically?
Look, I don't, to be honest. In fact, a lot of the feedback that I've been receiving, and especially if students will make a decision in many cases with their parents. And I know when talking to parents about student placements, in a lot of cases, one of the key considerations is safety. And so I think Tasmania at the moment stands out like a beacon. In fact, we are without doubt one of the safest places on the planet. And as the planet opens up, I think people will welcome our stronger arrangements around our border as we move forward.
Fantastic. We might just change it up a gear. You talked about Tasmania's environmental stand and its current standing against the net zero targets, which you're pretty much already meeting now. What lessons could be learned from Tasmania, and what could Tasmania offer Australia as a whole in supporting its journey to net zero?
Well, one thing that that needs to be point that needs to be made very clearly about our current emissions profile is that it has not come without cost. I mentioned the fact that we've got very strong renewable energy credentials. In fact, best in the country. We can generate 100% of our needs. But for the last 100 years, governments have had to make choices. When you think back in terms of the construction of dams and the significant hydro investment, governments and communities were making choices that that's where capital should be spent as opposed to other areas. And so, as we've worked our way through the last 100 years, there's been a price that's been paid, and that price has been the choice. In terms of our carbon sink, and I look back 10 years ago, and I argued against this at the time, which was when the forestry industry was cut in half. There were significant forest lockups. But what that has done is created a carbon sink. It's important to recognise, though, that there was a price that was paid for that, and that was those businesses that were affected, those regional and rural communities. But as a state, whilst we are in an enviable position, it has not been delivered to us without cost. What's important now is that we, off the base that we've got, ensure that we grasp every opportunity that presents to us. And the fact that we've got one of the lowest emissions profiles in the world, the fact that we've got one of the best renewable energy bases in the world, provides us with a great opportunity, I think a moment right now for Tasmania to demonstrate not just to the rest of the country but to the rest of the world as well what a small jurisdiction can do when it has the benefit of the position that we're in.
So with COP26 taking place, how would you rate our nation's performance at that?
Well, that's a question that's well above my pay grade. But thank you for asking it and
got to try
and giving me pause for thought as to whether or not I'd weigh into it or not, but I won't.
Well, with that, we might go to one more pigeonhole question.
But look, I will say on that. Look, I'll make this point. We are in such a good position in Tasmania, and we have never, I think, been loud enough on the national stage. You know, the steps that we have taken over time have put us into this very enviable position. Now what's important is that as we move forward, that we use the platform that we've got, because I think that at a national level we can change policy. I think at an international level we can change policy. And I think that as a state, we are wonderfully placed, not only to attract talent, but importantly to have a say in how the rest of this country and the rest of the world moves forward.
Thank you very much. That was a very politician's answer. So one last question, I think, before we wrap up. Look, I think with Tasmania's strong international brand, and we, you know, from Western Australia, we tend to have quite an outward focus as well. How does the state feel generally about the Team Australia approach, given that you know, states have been operating somewhat sort of independently? So as a brand.
Well, look, that sort of takes me to National Cabinet, and I'll make a comment on that. You know, well, apart from Dominic Perrottet, who's now the newest Premier in the country, you know, throughout the pandemic, I was the newest Premier at the table. And I had very little experience at COAG, and in fact there was only one COAG meeting that I attended, and that was the one when everything changed. With National Cabinet, the one thing that I've learnt is that every single Premier walks into that room and first and foremost he has his citizens and the community that he represents front and centre. And importantly, as a federation, what we've been able to do, albeit it's been at times a little clunky and there have been some diversions from the plan, but in the main, what we've been able to do as a group of men and women at that National Cabinet table under Morrison's leadership is actually put Australia into one of the best positions out of any country in the world if you look at case count and hospitalisations and deaths. And so whilst from those looking outside of National Cabinet, and we see the politics that are played in the lead up to National Cabinets, at the end of the day when we get into that room, front and centre of our thinking is the outcomes that we want for the health and safety of Australians wherever they might be in this country.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Premier. That takes us to the end of our Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it falls to me to close. I'm sure you're all sort of sick of seeing me up here. But I'd like to thank you all again for joining us today for this insightful conversation. Again, thank you to our sponsor, Westpac. Again, without your support, we couldn't hold these important discussions. Thank you to the Premier for his candid remarks and his presentation. I think the future of Tasmania is in good hands. Lastly, look, it would be amiss to me to not spruik our fantastic lineup of discussions are set for 2022 here in Tasmania, and you can find those at CEDA.com.au, where you can also find two of our upcoming events. So we have the CEDA annual dinner on the 23rd, which is in Sydney. I think they're all looking forward to that. But you can stream into that. We have Anna Bly and Matt Common who will be presenting at that. And then on the 29th, we have Women Who Lead, Climate Warriors. So again, thank you all for joining me, and until next year.